Its intention to follow through with a formal extradition request for Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. The U.S. accuses her of helping Huawei duck U.S. sanctions on Iran. The Chinese government furious because Meng is the CFO of one of the most richest and most respected tech companies in the world. Shortly after her arrest, China picked up 2 Canadian men on unspecified national security charges, and a Canadian man had his sentence on drug charges escalated from 15 years to the death penalty. Let's turn to our nightly panel for their thoughts on this international political drama. They are all in Toronto tonight. Joining me now is Anthony Furey, a columnist for the Toronto Sun. We have Muneeza Sheikh. She's an employment lawyer at Levitt LLP. Also joining me is Pam Palmater, also a lawyer and the chair in Indigenous Governance at Ryerson University. All right, let me start with you, Pam. What do you think of what Gary had to say, that the smart play here is that the Justice Minister for Canada, no matter what happens in the court, says, no, we're not sending her to the United States?
Well, I completely agree. I'm so glad you brought Gary on because, this perspective about, the rights of this individual and what's happened and how unusual this whole situation is really hasn't been a factor. And, the smart thing would be for President Trump to just not go ahead with this process, but we know he's not overly smart at times. So this really, forces Canada to actually do the right thing. We have a whole bunch of concerns here, not just the extradition treaty, but all of the human rights treaties that Canada is also bound by. And
how so? How do human rights treaties play in here?
Well, you have to look at this situation. So is there any reasonable chance that this person will have a fair and unbiased and unpolitically tainted trial if she is extradited to the U.S.? And I think you've got President Trump saying that, well, maybe we can come to a deal on her case if there's some economic benefit for the U.S. That's clearly a sign that this person is being used as a political lever for the, politics between the U.S. and China, and not as any real concern that they couldn't pursue in another forum as against the Huawei higher up executives or in a civil front.
All right. Anthony, what do you think? Should the Justice Department, should the new Justice Ministers say, nope, she's not going to the United States, it's clear this case is political?
You know what I think is I was sitting here listening in on your interview with Mr. Botting, and my jaw literally dropped, and I thought maybe I didn't hear him correctly, and then I just managed to close the jaw, and then it dropped again to hear Pamela agree with him. I mean, absolutely we need to follow through with this. I thought when Donald Trump said that when he said that he might actually not go through with this, I thought this is an awful thing because this leaves a political hot potato in our hands, in our lap, and we bear the full brunt and the full responsibility of it. Maybe these Iran charges will not result in a conviction. Maybe there's some sort of bogus element to it. I don't know. That is not up for Canada to decide. That is up for the United States to decide. And if we do drop this, we are giving in to this bullying, Carole. And part of what we're seeing right now is part of the sort of global realignment to not let China replace the United States as the dominant superpower in the world. I mean, what signal would it send if Canada de facto sided with China on this?
All right, you're shaking your head vociferously up and down. Muneeza, what's going through your mind?
I agree with Anthony 100%, and I too was very surprised both to hear that from your extradition expert lawyer and our first panel member who spoke. And at the end of the day, this is Pam, and ultimately this is I agree that this really would look like nothing more than us capitulating to China's demands. And remember, from the federal government's perspective, a lot of folks don't want to say this. It's a big year. It's the federal election. So is this really what we want your average Canadian layperson to see? That ultimately, we followed the rules under the extradition treaty. We heard some very exacting remarks from from Freeland, our minister today, and it almost sounded to me, Carole, and I'm curious as to what your other panel members think of it. It almost sounded like she was pleading with the public and saying, hey, FYI, just in case you don't know, we're simply following the rules. We're not saying that she didn't do anything that was above board here in Canada.
Let's get it straight from the horse's mouth. This is Canada's message to China. Our Foreign Affairs Minister, Freeland, speaking from Davos, Switzerland, rustling up support from like-minded allies to pressure China into doing something. But this was her message for China. Take a listen.
do think it's really important for China, for the Chinese people, for Huawei to understand that the Canadian legal system is fair and impartial to everyone, whether it's Canadians or non-Canadians. Also, as you said in your very correct introduction, the detention of Ms. Meng was not about a Canadian case against her. She is not accused of anything in Canada. She is neither charged nor convicted of anything in Canada. We have an extradition treaty with the United States. We share with the United States the world's longest unmilitarized border. And Canada's a rule of law country. We act and honor our international treaty commitments.
Pam, you're the lone voice on this today. Take a listen.
Well, I mean,
give me a reaction.
Canada always reverts to the quote-unquote rule of law as if there's no discretion to act on any law that comes before it, as if there's only one law that we're talking about here, this extradition treaty, and nothing else comes into play. And that's simply not the case in both extradition situations and all other situations in Canadian law. Discretion is an inherent part of that law. When it's applied, how it's applied, in what circumstances, making sure that you don't do undue hardship, making sure that you find real justice at the end, that you're not breaking other laws like international human rights treaties that Canada is also bound by. And the problem here is not with the law, because Canada could refuse to do this. Clearly, that's also following the rule of law. The problem is that you have 3 male world leaders that have all puffed up their chests, backed themselves into non-negotiable positions, and it's a woman that's going to pay the price for this instead of letting the U.S. and China work out their corporate problems.
Carole, I'll tell you why I disagree with that. I know it's Anthony's turn, but I just have to jump in here if I can. Ultimately,
it's a free-for-all now.
Okay, there we go. So ultimately, I mean, this case is now at the forefront. It's on the world stage. So we've got everybody watching at this point. So ultimately, if the goal was with these 3 male leaders to be unfair to this woman, you know, they could have done that at the time that Meng was arrested. Instead, there was a bail hearing. Ultimately, it was a fair bail hearing. She was released. You know, the bail conditions allow her to roam quite freely in Vancouver. So I find it a little hard to swallow. That's a hard pill for me to swallow, to make the assumption, and maybe this is not what Pam is saying, that now if there's, you know, extradition hearing, and remember, ultimately, we're not here to determine guilt or innocence. We're here to see, pardon me, if there's a prima facie case. I find now, with everybody watching, with the world spectators, I find it really hard to believe that she won't get her fair day in court. And so I say, you know, let's stick to what we said we're going to do. Let's be fair. We're being bullied, and we can't capitulate.
But see, that presumes that being in court and having a trial is fair and unpolitical and unbiased.
It's not a trial,
to begin with. It's whether or not should those charges have ever been laid, or was there a political motive behind that? And that's what the President Trump has very clearly stated, that this is about a political lever to try to negotiate some economic benefit for the U.S. So that brings.
Pam, you're just calling into question like the entire authenticity then of the Canadian and the American justice systems.
I agree.
No, these comments would apply to anybody accused of any crime then.
Eroding the...
Anthony, give us your opinion on this.
Yeah, I don't know what these undue hardships are that Pam brings up. To Muneeza's point, I think it's a 100-kilometer radius is the bail conditions, and she just has to be home from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., which is a mother of small children. I imagine she is anyway, like I am, whereas Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who are not actually accused of anything real, are in a cell, I believe, 24 hours a day where the lights are on the whole time. And I think they have
interrogated 4 hours a day.
Exactly, and they have access to a lawyer for, I think, 30 minutes a month. There's no reciprocity here. We've just seen that Poland has arrested Huawei executive for allegations of espionage. So it's not like this company, you know, Donald Trump randomly picked some Chinese company just to turn the screws on President Xi Jinping out of the blue. I mean, this is a company that there have been various concerns with before. So it's not like we should be 100% surprised by the fact that there's some sort of legal issue with a Huawei figure in North America.
And I will say, Carole, that at this point, you know, I'm angry. Like, as a Canadian citizen, I'm angry. As a lawyer, I'm angry, because what we have is really China off on a frolic of their own, completely ignoring the rule of law. And this is the time to finally stand up to them. Again, Carole, we have been in a similar situation back in 2006 when a life sentence was passed down to, I believe his name was Hussein Salil, in China. And at that time, again, the federal government was trying to rally support. You know, the federal government didn't even know where this gentleman was for the better part of a number of months. He was tortured. He didn't have access to to the Canadian consulate. So I'm tired of the bullying behavior, and we weren't able to do anything about it then. A lot of people were not aware of that case. It did involve the Muslim community, so I had a personal interest in the case. And so this time around, we've got to stand up to these bullies, Carol.
Carol, go ahead, Anthony, and then Pam.
Well, I just want to add, I mean, when we want to talk about undue hardships, I think one thing that has brought a lot of attention, that this case has brought a lot of attention to, is a lot of people are now looking at all the undue hardships that people in China experience from not even running afoul of the law, just state persecution. Mentioning the Muslim community, the Uyghur Muslims are facing an outlandish degree of persecution right now. And there's just so many things that people are going, oh, this is China's true nature. And I think one of the reasons we're finding them get particularly nasty towards the end of this fiasco, and I think it might even ramp up further as the extradition proceeds, is because people are realizing, the game is up, and this sort of charm offensive they've had for recent decades is actually losing its luster.
And they're not even hiding.
Hang on a second, Pam. You want to respond?
Yeah, I do, because whether or not China complies with all international human rights standards, whether or not they follow the same rule of law as Canada, never ever justifies Canada or the U.S. breaching any Chinese citizens' rights in any manner.
Well, it hasn't been established we've breached any rights.
What rights have we breached?
You've got a scenario where you're taking a mother and forcing her to live in a country, and who knows for how long or how many years, if this gets appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, with her children out of their family, out of their context, out of their community,
this is their home in Vancouver.
She's her home, Pam, and she's a wealthy woman who has the support of an entire nation behind her. I'm sorry, I don't see a victim. I don't see vulnerability.
Okay,
I just
earlier, another former Canadian ambassador, David Mulroney, spoke to CBC, and he says that China has figured out Canada's weakness. Take a listen to what he has to say. Interested to get your opinion.
Our weakness is really something that's commendable. We care for people, and we care for our people. Canadians now live their lives and pursue their careers all over the world, including in China. And what China is saying is, if you give us problems, we know how to make you heard. We're going to detain your citizens. We're going to, give them much harsher sentences. We're going to mistreat them if necessary. So this is not going to go away as an issue, but it's really important that we stand up to the Chinese. Otherwise, we open ourselves to this as, this is the key to getting a good decision out of Canada, detain another Canadian.
Pam,
there's two separate issues here. There's the bigger politics between the U.S., Canada, and China, and the issues that they have to resolve on a whole bunch of issues. And then there's the very particular individual case of this individual and whether or not charges were properly brought, whether it was for political purposes, and whether or not any of the process that might unravel either in Canada or in the United States is now tainted because of that bias and because of President Trump's very clear indication that they were going to use this person as a lever to try to get some economic benefit from China. I don't know how you untaint any process now, given that that's the position.
I don't disagree with Pam's view. Her conjecture as far as it relates to President Trump and his motivations, I don't necessarily disagry with that. So I do want to say that.
And that could end up being a factor in these hearings.
But we can't, automatically erode the credibility of the integrity of our own legal system and assume that just because they're not fair on that side of the border, it's not the first time, that it's going to be the same here. That's what I take issue with most significantly.
Carol, I think to the McNaughton comment, I think he makes a good point there, because there are some countries in the world, including China, who treat most people as, not most people, some people as expendable, and clearly China's saying, oh, some of our citizens are expendable, not Meng Wanzhou, and that's why they're making this fuss here. And we care, of course, about Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. I hope the solution to helping get them back is, we understand Chrystia Freeland's been talking to a number of world leaders, and I don't think she's asking them to tweet and hashtag out "We Stand with Canada." I think she's asking them to make it clear to China that we'll go on the offensive now, and maybe Huawei could be banned in other countries, and maybe the state-owned enterprises and the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank is going to find itself banned in other countries. That we will turn it back on them. We will turn the screws on them.
It's Canada today. It could be another country tomorrow, and I think Canada's doing the right thing by reaching out to all of our allies and saying, stand with us. It could be you tomorrow.
All right, we are so out of time, but this was a fantastic conversation. I want to thank you all very much. Anthony Furey, Toronto Sun columnist; Muneeza Sheikh, employment lawyer at Levitt LLP; Pam Palmater, lawyer and chair in Indigenous Governance at Ryerson University. Thank you all for talking about this with me tonight.
Thanks,
Carol.
Thank you.